Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight we're stepping into the shadows of Gotham City, where darkness doesn't just hide criminals, it creates them. We're going to explore the complete backstories of every major female villain who has ever faced Batman. And trust me, these aren't just stories about evil women. These are tales of tragedy, transformation, and the thin line between victim and villain. Before we begin, if you're ready for this journey through Gotham's darkest corners, hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're listening from tonight. Now, get comfortable, adjust your lighting, settle into your favorite spot, and let's begin. Picture this. A brilliant psychiatrist falls so deeply in love with a monster that she drowns herself in acid to prove her devotion. A young girl watches her mother die and grows up believing the only way to survive is to become something feared. A scientist seeking to save the world becomes a creature who wants to destroy humanity itself. A woman trained from birth by immortal assassins falls in love with the one man she can never fully have. What breaks a woman so completely that she becomes Gotham's nightmare? What moment transforms hope into hatred, love into obsession, dreams into vengeance? Tonight you'll discover the exact moments when ordinary women crossed the line into legend. Some were pushed, some were pulled, some walked across willingly. But all of them have one thing in common. Gotham changed them forever, and they changed Gotham right back. So take a deep breath, close your eyes if you'd like, and let me guide you through the complete chronicles of Gotham's most dangerous women. This is their story. Every scar, every choice, every fall from grace. Our journey begins with perhaps the most famous of all Batman's female adversaries, a woman who walks the razor's edge between hero and villain with such grace that even Batman himself can never quite decide which side she truly belongs to. This is the story of Selina Kyle, the woman who would become Catwoman. Selina's story starts in the poorest, most dangerous part of Gotham City, a place called the East End, where hope goes to die, and survival is the only skill that matters. She was born to Brian Kyle, a violent alcoholic, who saw his daughter as nothing more than another burden in his miserable life, and Maria Kyle, a woman so broken by depression and abuse that she barely acknowledged her child's existence. Young Selina learned early that love was a fantasy, that trust was dangerous, and that the only person she could rely on was herself. When Selina was just a child, she witnessed something that would scar her forever. Her mother, unable to bear the weight of her existence any longer, took her own life. Her father's response wasn't grief, it was rage. The abuse intensified. The little girl with the bright green eyes learned to move silently through their apartment, to read her father's moods, to disappear into shadows when his fists started flying. She was becoming a ghost in her own home, learning skills that would one day make her a legend. Eventually, the authorities intervened. Selina was taken from her father and placed in the Spitalfields Home for Children, and if she thought her life would improve, she was tragically mistaken. The orphanage was run by a cruel matron who treated the children like servants, who stole the donations meant to feed and clothe them, who punished any sign of spirit or independence. Selina watched the other children break under this treatment, watched them become hollow and obedient. She refused to break. At 13 years old, Selina Kyle ran away. She chose the streets over the institution. Danger over cruelty disguised as care. She lived in abandoned buildings, in alleys, on rooftops, anywhere she could find shelter. She survived by stealing, starting with food, then money, then whatever she could sell. But Selina was different from other street kids. She was smart, she was observant, and she had a natural gift that would become her trademark. She taught herself to move, using fire escapes, building ledges, clotheslines, and pure determination. Young Selina turned Gotham's architecture into her personal jungle gym. She developed reflexes like a cat, landing on her feet from falls that would have killed others. She learned to climb buildings, to slip through windows, to move across rooftops with fluid grace. The city became her territory, and she became nearly impossible to catch. For years she survived as a small-time thief, taking just enough to live, always staying one step ahead of the law, but everything changed the night she saw him. Batman, a figure of shadow and justice, moving through Gotham with purpose and power, feared by criminals and corrupt officials alike. Most people saw a monster. Selina saw possibility. If a man could put on a mask and become something more than human, why couldn't she? If fear could be a weapon, if a persona could be armor, if the night could belong to someone, why not her? She began to plan, to prepare, to transform from survivor into something legendary. Selina created her first Catwoman costume from whatever materials she could find or steal. It wasn't the sleek professional suit she would later wear. It was improvised, rough, but it was hers. She chose the cat as her symbol because she had always felt kinship with them, those other survivors of Gotham streets, beautiful and dangerous, never truly tamed. She taught herself to use a whip, practiced until her accuracy was perfect, until it became an extension of her arm. Her first heists were small but symbolic. She didn't just steal randomly, she targeted Gotham's wealthy elite, the same people who had ignored the East End's suffering, who had profited from the misery of people like her mother. In Selina's mind, she wasn't really stealing, she was redistributing. She was taking from those who had too much, and would never miss it. Sometimes, she even gave portions of her scores to East End families who needed it most. A Robin Hood in a catsuit, elegant and dangerous. It was inevitable that she would eventually cross paths with Batman. Their first encounter was electric, a dance of pursuit across Gotham's rooftops, and something unexpected happened. There was attraction, there was recognition, two people who wore masks, who had been shaped by Gotham's cruelty, who operated outside the law but by their own strict codes. Batman saw someone who could be saved. Catwoman saw someone who might understand her. Over the years, their relationship would become one of the most complicated in all of Gotham. They fought, they flirted, they worked together against greater threats. They betrayed each other when their codes conflicted. Selina walked the line between villain and hero, sometimes crossing to one side, sometimes to the other, but always on her own terms. She refused to be defined by Batman's morality or the criminal underworld's lack of it. As time passed, Selina evolved. She became the protector of the East End, especially its women and children. She used her skills and her stolen wealth to help those who had no one else. The girl who had been abandoned and abused became the woman who ensured others wouldn't suffer the same fate. She joined teams like the Birds of Prey, worked alongside heroes, but never fully abandoned her criminal ways. Catwoman remains one of Batman's greatest challenges because she can never be easily categorized. She's not evil. She's not purely good. She's Selina Kyle, the woman who refused to let Gotham break her, who turned trauma into strength, who proved that sometimes the most interesting people are the ones who refuse to choose a side. From the shadows of Gotham's criminal underworld emerges a figure unlike any other, a woman who doesn't fight for money or power, but for something far more primal. This is the story of how a brilliant botanist became nature's most deadly advocate, how betrayal transformed compassion into contempt for all humanity. Pamela Lillian Isley was born in Seattle, far from Gotham's corruption, in a home that appeared normal from the outside, but was emotionally barren within. Her parents were distant, cold, more concerned with appearances than affection. Young Pamela learned early that plants were more reliable than people. They responded to care. They didn't lie. They didn't abandon. In her family's garden, surrounded by roses and ferns and flowering vines, she found the love her parents never provided. This childhood fascination grew into academic brilliance. Pamela excelled in biological sciences, with a focus that impressed even her most demanding professors. She saw botany not just as a field of study, but as humanity's salvation. Plants could cure diseases, feed millions, restore damaged ecosystems. While other students studied for grades, Pamela studied with genuine reverence for the natural world. Her test scores were extraordinary. Her passion was unmatched. Gotham University offered her a full scholarship for advanced botanical research, and she accepted, believing she was stepping toward her destiny. Gotham University introduced her to Dr. Jason Woodrue, a charismatic professor whose reputation in experimental botany was legendary. He was older, confident, brilliant in ways that made Pamela's heart race. When he showed interest in her research, when he praised her insights, when he suggested they work together on something revolutionary, she felt seen for the first time in her life. That attention became affection. That affection became what Pamela believed was love. Woodrue's true experiments were hidden from the university, conducted in a private laboratory where ethics were obstacles to be avoided rather than guidelines to be followed. He was attempting something no scientist had successfully achieved before, creating a genuine hybrid between plant and animal physiology. He needed a human subject. He needed someone who trusted him completely. He needed Pamela. The manipulation was gradual and expertly executed. Woodrue convinced Pamela that they were partners in revolutionary science, that the experiments they discussed were theoretical, that the injections he prepared were merely vitamin supplements to keep her healthy during their long research hours. She trusted him with everything: her research, her future, her body. That trust was the weapon he used to destroy her. The toxins Woodrue injected into Pamela's bloodstream were a complex mixture of plant-based poisons, each one carefully selected for specific genetic properties. The first injection made her violently ill. The second nearly killed her. By the third, her body had stopped fighting and started changing. Her skin took on a slight greenish tint as chlorophyll began generating in her cells. Her blood chemistry transformed into something that had never existed in nature. The pain was indescribable, like her veins were filled with acid and her bones were splintering from within. Pamela spent 6 months in a hospital bed, her body warring with itself, human biology fighting against the foreign plant DNA, now woven into every cell. Doctors couldn't explain what was happening to her. They saw her symptoms but couldn't identify the cause because they had never seen anything like this before. Pamela drifted in and out of consciousness, and in her fever dreams she felt herself dying and being reborn as something entirely new. When she finally emerged from that hospital, Pamela Isley was gone. The woman who walked out was fundamentally different on a cellular level. Her skin now produced chlorophyll through photosynthesis. Her bloodstream contained natural toxins that would kill any normal human. She had become immune to all poisons, all diseases, all toxins that would harm ordinary people. But the most dramatic change wasn't physical, it was mental. Pamela discovered she could feel plants, sense their distress, hear their silent screams when they were cut or burned or poisoned. She could influence their growth with nothing but her thoughts, make vines move like serpents, cause flowers to bloom or wither at her command. Pheromones poured from her skin, chemical signals so potent they could control human behavior with a single touch. Her kiss became a weapon, her very presence a danger to anyone nearby. She had become a goddess of the green world, powerful and terrifying. The first thing she did with her new abilities was track down Jason Woodrue. She found him in his hidden laboratory, preparing to publish their research under his name alone, ready to sacrifice more victims in pursuit of scientific glory. Pamela walked into that lab as judge and executioner. The details of his death were never fully reported, but investigators found his body wrapped in vines, his skin covered in toxic pollen, his face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. She had made him understand what it felt like to be betrayed by someone you trusted. Next, she destroyed the laboratory completely, burned every note, every sample, every trace of the research that had transformed her. She wanted no one else to suffer what she had endured, and more importantly, she wanted no one to replicate what Woodrue had created. She would be unique. She would be the only one. From those ashes, Poison Ivy was born. Pamela Isley had believed in humanity's potential for good. Poison Ivy knew better. She had seen human cruelty up close, felt human betrayal in her bones. Humans destroyed forests for profit. They poisoned rivers for convenience. They saw nature as a resource to exploit rather than a partner to respect. Woodrew's betrayal had been personal, but humanity's war against nature was universal. She made her home in an abandoned greenhouse on the edge of Gotham, then later in Robinson Park, where she cultivated her own garden kingdom. Plants flourished under her care, growing larger and more vibrant than nature intended. She began her campaign against those who harmed the environment, targeting corporate executives who dumped chemicals, developers who clear-cut forests, politicians who rolled back environmental protections. Her methods were extreme, often deadly, but in her mind she was defending those who couldn't defend themselves. Batman became her frequent adversary, and their battles were ideologically complex. He couldn't argue with her goals. Protecting nature was noble, but her methods were murder. She saw him as another human who claimed to care, but did nothing substantial to stop the destruction. They fought across Gotham's rooftops and parks, his justice against her vengeance, and neither could quite defeat the other because both believed they were right. Years later, something unexpected happened. Pamela Isley, who had sworn off all human connection, found a friend. The story of Harley Quinn is perhaps the most tragic transformation in all of Gotham's dark history, a cautionary tale about how love can become chains, how brilliance can be manipulated, and how the person trying to heal monsters can become one herself. Harleen Frances Quinzel was born in Brooklyn, New York, into a home where violence was as common as dinner conversation. Her father was a con artist and small-time criminal, a man whose rage was unpredictable and whose fists were frequently aimed at his wife and daughter. Young Harleen learned to read moods, to diffuse tension with jokes, to make herself small when danger approached. Humor became her shield, laughter her survival mechanism. When people were laughing, they weren't hitting. Despite the chaos at home, or perhaps because of it, Harleen excelled academically. She had a brilliant mind that hunger for understanding, particularly understanding why people did terrible things. Psychology fascinated her, because it promised answers to the questions her childhood had carved into her soul. Why did her father hurt them? What made someone cruel? Could broken people be fixed? She earned a scholarship to Gotham State University, escaping Brooklyn and her father's shadow, determined to become the doctor who could heal the unhealable. Her doctorate thesis focused on criminal psychology, with an emphasis on understanding rather than punishing violent offenders. While her professors praised her academic rigor, some noted a troubling pattern in her work. Harleen had extraordinary empathy for her subjects. Perhaps too much. She could see past their crimes to the trauma beneath, the childhood wounds that had festered into adult violence. One professor wrote in an evaluation that Harleen Quinzel was brilliant but dangerously sympathetic to those she studied. That warning went unheeded. Arkham Asylum was Gotham's most prestigious psychiatric facility, a Gothic nightmare of stone and iron where the city's most dangerous minds were imprisoned. Securing an internship there was considered a significant achievement, and Harleen was thrilled when she was accepted. She arrived with genuine idealism, believing she could make breakthroughs where others had failed. She wanted to write the definitive book on criminal psychology, to make her mark on the field. More than that, she wanted to prove that even Gotham's worst could be understood, perhaps even saved. Her supervisors assigned her to interview various inmates, and Harleen approached each session with professional confidence. She spoke with killers and arsonists, with mob enforcers and delusional fanatics, and she handled each interaction with appropriate boundaries. Then came the assignment that would destroy her life. She was given permission to interview the Joker, Gotham's most infamous and enigmatic criminal, for her research. The Joker was unlike anyone Harleen had ever encountered. Where other criminals made excuses or showed remorse, he showed neither. He was charming and horrifying in equal measure, capable of making her laugh one moment and chilling her blood the next. More importantly, he saw through her immediately. He recognized her childhood trauma, her desperate need to save people, her buried belief that if she could fix someone broken enough, it would somehow retroactively heal her own past. He saw her vulnerability, and decided to exploit it completely. Their sessions became the highlight of Harleen's week, though she told herself it was purely professional interest. The Joker shared stories about his past, tragic tales of abuse and loss that made her heart ache. He had so many origin stories, each one different, each one perfectly crafted to elicit her sympathy. He made her feel special, made her believe she was the only person who truly understood him. He flirted, but subtly enough that she could pretend not to notice. He became vulnerable, but only when they were alone. Every interaction was calculated manipulation, and Harleen walked deeper into his trap with each session. She started breaking rules, small ones at first, staying past her allotted time with him, bringing him small privileges other inmates didn't receive. Then larger violations, meeting with him without supervision, accepting his version of events without verification. Her colleagues noticed the changes in her behavior and warned her, but Harleen dismissed their concerns as jealousy or misunderstanding. She believed she was making breakthrough progress. She believed they had a special connection. She believed she was in love. When the Joker asked her to help him escape, Harleen didn't hesitate. She disabled security systems, unlocked doors, gave him weapons. She threw away her career, her freedom, her entire identity, because he convinced her they belonged together. She imagined gratitude, perhaps even a declaration of love. Instead, the Joker laughed at her. He mocked her feelings, called her a fool, treated her escape assistance as nothing more than a convenience. That should have been her waking moment, the instant she realized she had been used. But the Joker had one more transformation planned for her. He brought her to Ace Chemicals, the same place where he claimed he had been created. He told her that if she truly wanted to be with him, she needed to prove it by taking the same leap he had. Harleen looked into those vats of bubbling chemicals and understood this would either kill her or change her forever. The rational part of her mind screamed warnings. The broken part, the part the Joker had carefully cultivated, saw this as romantic destiny. She jumped. The chemicals burned away her skin's natural pigmentation, bleaching her pale and transforming her physically. But the psychological transformation was far more profound. Whatever remained of Dr. Harleen Quinzel's rational mind shattered in that vat. When she emerged, something new had been born. Harley Quinn crawled out of those chemicals, reborn as the Joker's devoted girlfriend, her brilliant mind now fractured and reshaped around obsessive love for a man who viewed her as a temporary amusement. The years that followed established a horrific pattern. Harley would assist the Joker in his crimes, proving her devotion through escalating acts of violence and chaos. He would abuse her, emotionally and physically, treating her as disposable when she displeased him, or simply when he grew bored. He would abandon her, leaving her to face arrest alone while he escaped. She would be captured, imprisoned, and eventually escape or be released. Then the cycle would begin again, because despite everything, despite the bruises and betrayals, Harley loved him. Other criminals saw what was happening, and some even tried to intervene. Batman himself attempted multiple times to break through to Harleen, to remind her of who she had been before the Joker destroyed her. These interventions would sometimes work temporarily. Harley would remember her doctorate, her dreams, her life before him. But the Joker always pulled her back, sometimes with false promises of change, sometimes with manipulation that exploited her deepest insecurities. The woman who would eventually break this cycle wasn't Batman or any hero. She was another villain who recognized a fellow survivor of abuse. Her name was Pamela Esley, and the world knew her as Poison Ivy. While most of Batman's female adversaries were created by Gotham's corruption, Talia al Ghul was forged by something far older and infinitely more dangerous. She is the daughter of Ra's al Ghul, the demon's head, leader of the League of Assassins, and she was raised to be perfect in every way that perfection can be measured by those who deal in death. Talia's childhood was unlike anything most people could imagine. While other children played with toys, she trained with weapons. While they learned to read from storybooks, She studied texts on military strategy written in languages most scholars never encounter. Her father's organization, the League of Assassins, had existed for centuries, operating from hidden fortresses scattered across the globe. Rajas al Ghul had used the Lazarus Pits, mysterious pools of alchemical liquid that could resurrect the dead and grant extended life, to survive for hundreds of years. His daughter would be raised as the heir to this ancient legacy. From her earliest memories, Talia knew she was being prepared for greatness. Her father hired the world's finest teachers, masters of combat from every martial tradition, scholars who had devoted their lives to forbidden knowledge, strategists who had toppled governments. She learned to fight with swords, daggers, staffs, and her bare hands. She became fluent in dozens of languages. She studied chemistry, history, philosophy, and the subtle art of manipulation. By the time she was a teenager, Talia al Ghul could walk into any room in the world and command it, either through charm or through violence. But beneath the training and discipline, there was genuine humanity in young Talia. Her father's ideology demanded that she view the world through a lens of necessary sacrifice. Raz believed humanity was a plague destroying the earth, that billions needed to die so the planet could heal. Talia absorbed these teachings, but she also absorbed something softer from her mother, whose identity and fate varied depending on which account you believed. In every version, however, the lesson was the same. Those we love can be taken from us suddenly and permanently. The defining trauma of Talia's youth came when her mother was murdered by one of Raz al Ghul's many enemies. Young Talia witnessed the violence, held her mother as she died, and begged her father to use the Lazarus Pit to bring her back. Raz refused. The pit could resurrect those who had been recently killed and whose bodies were relatively intact, but Talia's mother had been too badly damaged. The pit would have brought back something mad and broken. Raz made his daughter watch as her mother's body was prepared for burial in the traditional way, forcing her to understand that even with all his power and ancient magic, some deaths were permanent. That moment crystallized something in Talia. She intensified her training, drove herself harder than her instructors demanded, because she vowed never to be helpless again. She would become strong enough to protect what she loved. She would be worthy of her father's legacy. She would be the perfect heir to the demon's head. Then she met Bruce Wayne, and everything became infinitely more complicated. Their first encounter happened during one of Batman's early investigations into the League of Assassins. The details varied by account, but the result was always the same: instant mutual attraction complicated by completely opposing ideologies. Bruce saw in Talia a brilliant woman trapped by her father's extremism, someone who could be reasoned with, perhaps even saved from the League's influence. Talia saw in Bruce something her father had sought for decades, a man of extraordinary capability and unwavering principle who could be the perfect successor to lead the League. She also saw something she had never expected to feel. She fell deeply, genuinely in love. Ra's al Ghul approved of this development. He had been searching for an heir worthy of the League's legacy, and Batman represented everything he valued. The detective, as Ra's called him with genuine respect, was brilliant, incorruptible, and absolutely committed to his mission. If Batman could be convinced to join the League, to marry Talia, and embrace Ra's vision of saving the world through controlled devastation, the future would be secure. Ra's encouraged the romance, brought them together repeatedly, and watched with approval as his daughter and his chosen successor grew closer. But Talia's heart was divided in ways that caused her constant anguish. She loved Bruce with an intensity that sometimes frightened her. When they were together, when he held her and spoke of the life they could build, she wanted nothing more than to abandon the League and choose him. But she also loved her father and believed deeply in his mission, even when she questioned his methods. Raz had raised her, trained her, shaped her into who she was. The League wasn't just her inheritance, it was her identity. This internal conflict defined Talia's relationship with Batman for decades. She helped him against her father's plans when her conscience demanded it, providing crucial intelligence that saved countless lives. Then she betrayed him when the League's greater mission required it, sometimes leading to Batman's capture or the success of Raid's schemes. She was never fully on either side because she genuinely belonged to both. She was Ra's al Ghul's devoted daughter and Bruce Wayne's true love, and those two identities were perpetually at war within her soul. The complexity deepened when Talia became pregnant with Bruce's child. The circumstances of conception varied by continuity. Some versions depicted it as consensual and planned, others as Talia drugging Bruce to obtain his genetic material without consent. Regardless of how it happened, the result was Damian Wayne, a child who inherited his father's brilliance and determination, along with his mother's training and his grandfather's ruthlessness. Talia raised Damian within the League of Assassins, training him from infancy in every skill she possessed. She was simultaneously a loving mother and a demanding instructor, capable of embracing her son one moment and forcing him through brutal combat exercises the next. She prepared him to be perfect, just as she had been prepared. When Damian was old enough, she brought him to Bruce, changing both their lives in ways neither could have anticipated. In her later years, Talia took control of the League of Assassins after Ra's death. Though he died and was resurrected so many times through the Lazarus pits, that death became almost meaningless in their family. She proved herself more ruthless than her father in some ways, creating the Leviathan organization with ambitions of global control that even Ra's had never attempted. The Lazarus pits that had extended her life also began affecting her mind, each resurrection stripping away small pieces of her humanity until the woman who had once genuinely loved became someone capable of unspeakable acts in pursuit of saving a world she no longer fully belonged to. Among all the warriors who have ever walked the earth, one name stands above the rest as the absolute pinnacle of martial perfection. She is not driven by ideology or madness or revenge in the traditional sense. She is driven by something purer and more terrifying: the pursuit of combat as the ultimate expression of human potential. This is Lady Shiva, and her story begins not with violence but with love. Sandra Wu San was born in Detroit to a Chinese-American family that valued tradition and discipline. She had a younger sister named Carolyn, and the two girls were inseparable from their earliest days. Their parents enrolled them in martial arts training when they were young, and both sisters showed exceptional natural talent. But what made them truly special was how they moved together. They developed a unique fighting style that blended their individual strengths into something that had never existed before, a dance of combat so fluid and beautiful that masters twice their age would stop to watch them train. Carolyn was the gentler of the two sisters, more interested in the philosophical aspects of martial arts than the combative applications. She saw their training as a path to inner peace and self-discipline. Sandra was different. She felt something primal awaken inside her when she fought, a clarity and purpose that nothing else in life provided. But despite their different temperaments, the sisters loved each other deeply. They were two halves of a whole, and neither could imagine a world without the other. That world came crashing down when Carolyn was murdered. A martial artist seeking to prove himself as the greatest fighter alive had studied the Wu San sisters and determined that their unique style represented the ultimate challenge. But he made a calculated decision. He would kill Carolyn, believing that the grief and rage would force Sandra to perfect their shared techniques in pursuit of revenge. He would then face Sandra at her absolute peak, and defeating her would cement his legacy as the supreme warrior. His plan worked perfectly, except for one crucial detail. He never considered that Sandra Wu San, once perfected, would be utterly unstoppable. Sandra's grief was all-consuming. She had lost her sister, her partner, her best friend, and the person who understood her better than anyone in the world. But beneath that grief was rage of such intensity that it burned away everything soft inside her. She sought out the League of Assassins, the most elite training organization on Earth, and demanded they teach her everything they knew. Ra's al Ghul himself, recognizing something extraordinary in her fury, agreed to personally oversee her instruction. The training was brutal beyond description. Raz had trained countless assassins over his centuries of existence, but he had never encountered anyone who absorbed techniques as quickly as Sandra. She learned every fighting style the League could teach her, mastered weapons from dozens of cultures, and developed an almost supernatural ability to read opponents. She could watch someone move for mere seconds and identify every weakness in their technique, every gap in their defense, every unconscious habit that would lead to their defeat. She took the name Shiva, after the Hindu goddess of destruction, and the title Lady to distinguish herself from any who might think her gender made her less dangerous. That assumption cost several challengers their lives. Lady Shiva emerged from her training as something unprecedented in human history. She was not the best female martial artist. She was the best martial artist, period. No qualifier necessary. She found her sister's killer, and the fight lasted less than a minute. He had spent years preparing to face her. But the Sandra he had studied no longer existed. Lady Shiva destroyed him so completely that witnesses struggled to describe what they had seen. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution performed with surgical precision. When it was over, Sandra waited to feel relief or satisfaction or closure. She felt nothing except the hollowness where Carolyn had been. From that emptiness, a new philosophy emerged. Lady Shiva came to believe that martial arts represented the highest achievement of human capability, the perfect fusion of mind and body working in absolute harmony. She began seeking out worthy opponents, not for revenge or ideology, but to test herself against the best fighters in the world. She viewed combat as a form of intimate connection between warriors, and she saw killing an opponent as a deeply personal act that honored their commitment to the fight. This worldview made her terrifying to encounter. She had no interest in money or power or territory. She simply wanted to fight people who were skilled enough to make the battle meaningful. Sometimes she would even train opponents before fighting them, helping them reach their peak so that defeating them would have genuine value. She respected anyone who committed fully to combat, but she had absolute contempt for those who wasted their potential or held back during fights. Her reputation spread throughout the criminal underworld and beyond. Hiring Lady Shiva meant guaranteed success, but also meant accepting that she might decide the person who hired her wasn't worthy and kill them instead. She worked with the League of Assassins periodically, took assassination contracts when they interested her, and occasionally fought heroes simply to test their abilities. Batman faced her multiple times, and while his skills were extraordinary, even he acknowledged that in pure hand-to-hand combat, Lady Shiva was superior. Then came the revelation that forever complicated her story. She had a daughter named Cassandra Cain, born from a relationship with an assassin named David Cain. The circumstances were cold and transactional. Cain wanted to create the perfect weapon, a child who would be trained from birth to read body language instead of learning spoken words. Shiva agreed to bear this child, then left Cassandra with Cain to raise as he saw fit. She watched from a distance as her daughter was shaped into a living weapon, and she felt something she had thought her grief had burned away, pride mixed with disappointment when Cassandra eventually rejected the path of killing and joined Batman's crusade instead. Their relationship became a source of ongoing conflict. Shiva would appear periodically to test Cassandra, to push her toward embracing her full potential as a fighter, even if that meant embracing the act of killing. She genuinely wanted her daughter to surpass her, to become something even greater than the world's deadliest assassin. But she also couldn't understand why Cassandra would limit herself with Batman's moral code, why she would waste such extraordinary gifts on restraint. Lady Shiva remains one of the most dangerous individuals alive, and her appearance in Gotham always signals that someone is about to die or be forever changed by combat. She represents the purity of violence divorced from emotion, the terrifying endpoint of pursuing perfection in the art of killing. She is not evil in any conventional sense. She simply exists in a moral framework so alien to normal human experience that concepts like good and evil don't apply. There is only the fight, the perfect moment of two warriors meeting at their absolute best, and the inevitable conclusion when one proves superior to the other. The Al Ghul family tree extends far beyond Talia, and each branch tells a story of how immortality and ideology can twist love into something unrecognizable. These women were shaped by Ra's al Ghul's vision, but each responded to that shaping in dramatically different ways. Nissa Radko was Ra's al Ghul's first daughter, born decades before Talia due to the time-distorting effects of the Lazarus pits. While Talia grew up in luxury and received the finest training, Nissa's childhood was marked by unimaginable horror. She was born in the 1940s and lived in Europe during the rise of Nazi Germany. When the war came, Nissa, her husband, and her children were Jewish prisoners swept up in the Holocaust's machinery of death. She watched her family die in the concentration camps. Her husband was worked to death. Her children were murdered before her eyes. She endured starvation, torture, and degradation that would have destroyed most people's sanity. Throughout her suffering, she sent desperate messages to her father, begging him to use his vast resources and network to save them. Ra's al Ghul received every message. He read about his daughter's agony and his grandchildren's deaths, and he did nothing. Rons believed in non-interference with what he called mortal affairs. Wars, genocides, plagues were all part of humanity's natural cycle in his worldview. To intervene would be to disrupt the natural order he claimed to protect. This philosophy allowed him to abandon his own daughter to hell on earth. Nissa survived the camps through sheer willpower, and when liberation came, she was hollow inside. The woman who emerged from that nightmare had been fundamentally transformed by betrayal. She spent decades hunting down the last remnants of those who had tormented her, and when that revenge was complete, she turned her attention to the man who had abandoned her. Nissa eventually gained access to the Lazarus pits and used them to extend her own life, becoming immortal like her father. But where Raz used his extended lifespan to pursue his vision of environmental balance, Nissa used hers to pursue revenge against the man who had let her family die. She was more ruthless than Talia could ever imagine being. Nissa had experienced the absolute worst of human cruelty, and it had burned away any remaining compassion or restraint. When she briefly took control of the League of Assassins, she tortured Talia extensively, punishing her half-sister for the crime of being Raz's favored daughter. The pain she inflicted came from a place of rage that had been building for decades. Every wound she gave Talia was a message to their father about the cost of his abandonment. Nissa's story represented the darkest possible outcome of Ra's al Ghul's ideology. She was proof that pursuing absolute principles, even principles that claim to value life and balance, can lead to monstrous acts when those principles exclude basic human compassion. Then there was Cassandra Cain, daughter of Lady Shiva, and the assassin David Cain, who represented something entirely different. While Nissa and Talia were shaped by their father's ideology, Cassandra was shaped by an experiment in creating the perfect weapon. David Cain raised her in complete isolation, never speaking to her, never allowing her to hear human language. Instead, he trained her to read body language as her primary form of communication. By the time she was 8 years old, Cassandra could predict an opponent's movements before they made them, could see the subtle shifts in muscle and posture that telegraphed every action. She was a prodigy of violence, able to defeat trained fighters with an ease that seemed supernatural. Her first word, in the only language she understood, was the act of killing. David Cain forced her to commit murder, and the experience traumatized her so completely that she ran away and spent years hiding from both her parents. The unique tragedy of Cassandra's story was that she had been robbed of normal human development in pursuit of making her the ultimate assassin, but the trauma of her first kill had given her an absolute opposition to taking life. When she eventually found her way to Batman, she became Batgirl and proved herself the most naturally gifted fighter in the entire Bat family. Even Batman acknowledged that in pure combat ability, Cassandra surpassed him. Her relationship with her mother Shiva was complicated and painful. Shiva would appear periodically to test Cassandra, pushing her to embrace her full potential as a fighter. From Shiva's perspective, she was trying to help her daughter become everything she was capable of becoming. From Cassandra's perspective, her mother was trying to turn her back into a killer. They fought multiple times, and these battles were as much about ideology as they were about physical superiority. Cassandra represented hope in a family tree, defined by tragedy and extremism. She had been engineered to be a weapon, raised by assassins, born to a mother who viewed killing as the highest form of human expression. Despite all of that, she chose a different path. She proved that even someone created specifically for violence could reject that purpose and forge their own identity based on protection rather than destruction. These women, Nyssa, Cassandra, and others who orbited the Al Ghul family, demonstrated the many ways that Ra's al Ghul's vision poisoned those around him. Some, like Nyssa, were broken by his neglect. Others, like Cassandra, were shaped by his ideology through proxy, but managed to escape it. Together they painted a portrait of a family that had lived too long, accumulated too much power, and lost sight of the basic human connections that make immortality worth having. The Al Ghul legacy was one of brilliance and tragedy in equal measure, and the women of that family bore the heaviest costs of their patriarch's eternal crusade. Not all of Batman's female adversaries were trained assassins or scientific accidents. Some were simply people broken by circumstances beyond their control, women whose bodies or lives betrayed them in ways that society refused to accommodate. Their stories are perhaps the most heartbreaking because their villainy stems not from evil but from desperation and pain that found no other outlet. Mary Dahl was born with a rare condition called systemic hypoplasia, a disorder that caused her body to stop developing in early childhood, while her mind matured normally, growing and learning and experiencing all the complexities of adolescence and adulthood. Her physical form remained frozen at the appearance of a young child. Imagine the psychological torture of that existence. To feel desire, ambition, intellect, all the emotions of an adult woman, but to be trapped in a body that everyone treats as a child. Hollywood gave Mary a chance when she was cast in a sitcom called Love That Baby, where her condition became her career. She played an adorable little girl, and America fell in love with her character. For years the show was successful, and Mary was celebrated. But as the actress aged mentally while remaining physically static, the show eventually lost its appeal and was cancelled. Mary tried desperately to transition into adult roles, to be taken seriously as the grown woman she was, but casting directors saw only her appearance. No one would hire her for anything beyond child roles, and even those opportunities dried up as newer child actors came along. The rejection destroyed something fundamental in Mary's psyche. She developed dissociative identity disorder, with her personality splitting between Mary Dahl, the bitter adult desperate for respect, and Baby Doll, the childish persona that threw violent tantrums when she didn't get her way. She created a criminal identity around her former television show, building robotic versions of her old cast members to serve as her gang. She kidnapped the actors who had worked with her, trying to recreate the only time in her life when she felt valued and loved. Her crimes were violent, but also profoundly sad. Baby Doll lashed out at anyone who patronized her or treated her like a child, which was almost everyone. She wanted desperately to be seen as an adult, to be respected and loved for who she was rather than what she looked like, but her methods only reinforced everyone's perception of her as unstable and dangerous. Batman showed her rare compassion, recognizing that beneath the violence was a woman who had been failed by every system meant to support her. Her story remains one of the most tragic in Gotham's history because her condition wasn't her fault, yet she paid the price for it every day of her life. Paige Monroe's tragedy was different, but equally rooted in society's cruelty. She had been a top supermodel, gracing magazine covers and walking runways for the world's most prestigious fashion houses. Her beauty had been her currency, and for years, that currency bought her everything. Fame, wealth, admiration. The fashion industry had treated her like royalty, but the industry that builds people up on beauty alone has no loyalty when that beauty begins to fade. As Paige aged, the bookings became less frequent. Younger models replaced her in campaigns she had once dominated. Designers who had fought to dress her suddenly had scheduling conflicts. The industry that had worshipped her youth now discarded her with brutal efficiency. Paige watched her career crumble not because she had lost her talent or work ethic, but simply because she was getting older. The psychological impact was devastating. She became obsessed with time passing, with the calendar itself as the enemy stealing everything she had worked for. When she snapped and became Calendar Girl, her crimes were elaborately themed around specific dates and holidays. She stole anti-aging technology, kidnapped the models who had replaced her, and targeted the fashion executives who had cast her aside. She wore different elaborate costumes for each month, each one a masterpiece of design, as if proving she still understood beauty and style better than anyone. The truly heartbreaking aspect of Calendar Girl's story was that she was still beautiful. She suffered from body dysmorphia so severe that when she looked in mirrors, she saw decay and ugliness that didn't actually exist. Her villainy was born from internalized ageism, from an industry that had taught her that a woman's value expires with her youth. Batman fought her but also recognized her as a victim of a system that chews people up and spits them out the moment they're no longer profitable. Andrea Beaumont's story was perhaps the most tragic of all, because she was never truly a villain in the traditional sense. She was Bruce Wayne's first love, the woman who knew him before Batman fully consumed his identity. They met when they were young, both from wealthy families, both trying to find meaning in lives of privilege. Andrea was intelligent, compassionate, and she saw through Bruce's playboy facade to the wounded man beneath. Their romance was genuine and deep. Bruce proposed marriage, and for a brief moment he considered abandoning his mission to become Batman. Andrea represented the normal life he could have, the happiness and peace that revenge would never provide. But Andrea's father had been involved in money laundering for the mob, and when that came to light, the family had to flee Gotham to escape retaliation. Andrea left without fully explaining why, breaking Bruce's heart and inadvertently pushing him further into becoming Batman. Years later, Andrea's father was murdered by the mobsters he had tried to escape, and she returned to Gotham transformed. As the Phantasm, she wore a dark cloak and used technology that created smoke and shadows, making her appear almost supernatural. She systematically killed everyone responsible for her father's death, and her methods were efficient and merciless. She wasn't interested in Batman's code of justice. She wanted pure vengeance, and she took it. Batman had to stop her despite still loving her, despite understanding exactly why she had become what she was. Andrea represented the path Bruce could have taken, pure revenge, without the restraint of justice. Their confrontation was emotionally devastating for both of them. She still loved him, he still loved her, but they had chosen different responses to their trauma, and those choices made them enemies despite their shared history. Andrea Beaumont remains unique among Batman's adversaries, because she wasn't broken or insane or evil. She was simply a woman who had lost everything, and chosen to make those responsible pay the ultimate price. Her story asks uncomfortable questions about the difference between Batman's vigilantism and her vengeance, about why one is celebrated and the other condemned. Talia Knight, known as Nocturna, brought a different kind of tragedy to Gotham's underworld. Born into a wealthy family with aristocratic pretensions, Talia suffered from an extreme form of photosensitivity that made exposure to sunlight agonizing and potentially fatal. She could only exist comfortably in darkness, which shaped her entire identity and worldview. She embraced the vampire aesthetic, despite not being an actual vampire, cultivating an image of gothic elegance and nocturnal beauty. Nocturna became a sophisticated thief who targeted high society, stealing from the same social circles her family had once belonged to. Her crimes funded her astronomical research and allowed her to live in the opulent darkness she required. But the most significant part of her story involved Jason Todd, the boy who would become the second Robin. Before Bruce Wayne took Jason in, Nocturna attempted to adopt him, seeing in the street kid something of herself, an outsider who didn't fit into normal society's expectations. The custody battle between Bruce Wayne and Talia Knight was unusual because both genuinely cared about Jason's well-being, though their methods and worldviews couldn't have been more different. Nocturna lost that battle, and Jason went with Bruce, but she remained a figure who occasionally helped or hindered Batman depending on her mood and interests. She represented the aristocratic criminal, someone who stole not from necessity but from a combination of boredom, spite toward the society that had marginalized her, and a genuine love of the night that matched Batman's own. As Gotham evolved, so did its criminals. The newer generation of female villains reflected contemporary anxieties and modern psychology, showing how each era produces villains that mirror its specific darkness. These women weren't shaped by the same forces that created Catwoman or Poison Ivy. They were products of social media culture, celebrity worship, and a world where violence could be packaged as entertainment. Alexis Kay grew up in a normal suburban home with parents who loved her and provided everything she needed. There was no abuse, no tragedy, no clear explanation for what she would become. Some people are simply born with something wrong in their wiring, and Alexis was one of them. She exhibited psychopathic tendencies from childhood, a complete lack of empathy hidden beneath a charming exterior. She learned early how to mimic normal human emotions, how to make people believe she cared when she felt nothing. As a teenager, Alexis became fascinated with chaos theory and the philosophical idea that the universe operates on randomness rather than order. She began studying Gotham's most famous criminal, the Joker, analyzing his crimes like other kids analyzed pop stars. But unlike Harley Quinn, who fell in love with the man, Alexis fell in love with the concept. She saw the Joker as a misunderstood artist, someone who revealed uncomfortable truths about society through violence. She didn't want to be his girlfriend. She wanted to be his partner, his equal, the one who truly understood his vision. When Harley Quinn finally broke free from the Joker and began her journey toward redemption, Alexis saw an opportunity. She engineered a meeting with the Joker, presenting herself as everything Harley had failed to be. She was rational where Harley had been emotional. She was calculating where Harley had been impulsive. Most importantly, she had never loved him, which meant she could never be hurt by his rejection or abuse. She offered partnership based on mutual appreciation of chaos rather than messy romantic feelings. The Joker accepted, and Punchline was born. She chose the name deliberately, positioning herself as the culmination of the Joker's jokes rather than the butt of them like Harley had been. She was more dangerous than Harley had ever been because her commitment came from ideology rather than emotion. You can break emotional bonds, but you cannot reason someone out of a worldview they've built their entire identity around. Punchline targeted Harley Quinn specifically and viciously, seeing her as a weak predecessor who had wasted the opportunity Alexis now possessed. Their conflicts became deeply personal, with Punchline representing everything Harley had escaped from and everything she feared she might have become if she had never found the strength to leave. Punchline proved that the Joker's influence could corrupt even without the element of romantic manipulation, that his philosophy of chaos could appeal to broken people in ways that had nothing to do with love. Roxanne Sutton, known as Roxy Rocket, represented a completely different type of modern villain. She had no tragic backstory, no abuse or betrayal to explain her criminal career. Roxy had been a Hollywood stuntwoman, talented and successful, but she discovered something troubling about herself. Normal life bored her to the point of depression. She was an adrenaline addict who needed constant danger and excitement to feel alive. She designed and built her own rocket-powered vehicle, a sleek machine capable of incredible speeds and maneuvers that defied physics. Then she started robbing places, not because she needed money, but because the thrill of the heist, the chase, the narrow escape made her feel more alive than anything else could. During her encounters with Batman, she would flirt shamelessly, clearly enjoying the game more than caring about whether she succeeded in her crimes or escaped capture. Roxy Rocket was unusual because she had no interest in hurting anyone. Violence didn't excite her. The rush came from the risk itself, from pushing limits and seeing how close to disaster she could fly before pulling back. She represented a type of criminal that Gotham's usual rehabilitation methods couldn't address because she wasn't damaged or mentally ill in traditional ways. She was simply wired to need danger the way other people need food or sleep, and no amount of therapy could change that fundamental aspect of her personality. Jaina Hudson brought something entirely unique to Gotham's criminal landscape when she appeared as the White Rabbit. Born to a wealthy Indian-American family, Jaina seemed like typical Gotham high society, a socialite more interested in parties than crime. But she created an alter ego inspired by Alice in Wonderland, adopting the White Rabbit persona for sophisticated crimes that played with puzzles and riddles in ways that rivaled even the Riddler's schemes. What made White Rabbit truly unusual was her ability to exist in two places simultaneously. She could create a perfect duplicate of herself, meaning Jaina Hudson could be attending a charity gala with dozens of witnesses, while the White Rabbit committed crimes across the city. This ability was never fully explained, leaving questions about whether it was technology, magic, or something else entirely. The mystery surrounding her powers made her particularly difficult for Batman to anticipate or counter. White Rabbit represented the modern era's obsession with duality, with the masks people wear on social media versus their true selves. Jaina's wealth and status gave her everything. Society claimed people needed to be happy, yet she risked it all for the thrill of playing a character who operated outside society's rules. She was a commentary on how privilege can breed its own form of emptiness, how having everything can sometimes mean having nothing that truly matters. These newer villains showed how Gotham's darkness adapted to changing times. Where older villains like Catwoman were forged by poverty and abuse, modern villains like Punchline and White Rabbit emerged from different circumstances. Celebrity worship culture, social media's performative nature, the way violence could be aestheticized and packaged for consumption, these contemporary forces created new types of criminals who were no less dangerous than their predecessors, but who operated from entirely different psychological frameworks. Batman found these modern adversaries particularly challenging, because the traditional approaches to understanding criminal motivation didn't always apply. How do you rehabilitate someone like Punchline who isn't acting from trauma but from genuine ideological belief in chaos? How do you reform someone like Roxy Rocket whose crimes stem from neurological wiring rather than psychological damage? These questions highlighted how the nature of villainy itself was evolving, becoming more complex and harder to address through conventional justice systems. The evolution of female villains in Gotham mirrored broader societal changes, reflecting how each generation's darkness takes unique forms. Where earlier villains embodied fears about poverty, scientific ethics, and institutional betrayal, newer villains embodied anxieties about authenticity, purpose, and the emptiness that can exist even in lives of apparent privilege and success. Gotham remained a city that created monsters, but the specific shape those monsters took continued to change with the times. Some of Gotham's female villains didn't choose their path through ideology or trauma alone. They were physically transformed into something no longer entirely human, and their villainy stemmed from the horror of losing their humanity one piece at a time. These are the women who became monsters, and their stories ask uncomfortable questions about where the line between victim and villain truly lies. Sandra Fuller had been a scientist working on molecular reconstruction technology, researching ways to help burn victims and people with disfiguring injuries. Her work was groundbreaking and humanitarian in its goals. Then a government agency discovered her research and saw military applications she had never intended. They took her, experimented on her without consent, and transformed her into something that had never existed before. Sandra became a shapeshifter. Her entire molecular structure converted into a clay-like substance that could assume any human form with perfect accuracy. She could become anyone, mimic their appearance down to fingerprints and retinal patterns. The transformation gave her incredible power, but stripped away something fundamental. Her natural form was no longer human. She was clay that remembered being a woman, and that memory became increasingly distant with each transformation. Initially, Sondra sought revenge against those who had transformed her, hunting down the government operatives and scientists who had stolen her humanity. But revenge didn't restore what she had lost. She fell in with Basil Carlo, the original Clayface, and their relationship gave her something she desperately needed. Someone who understood what it meant to be trapped between human and monster, someone who saw her as more than the weapon she had been turned into. Together they committed crimes across Gotham, and Sondra's abilities made her nearly impossible for Batman to track or contain. She could be anyone, anywhere, and her clay form was nearly indestructible. But the real tragedy was watching her lose more of Sondra Fuller with each passing year. The longer she remained transformed, the harder it became to remember what being human had felt like. She wanted to be cured, to return to her original form, but she was also terrified of losing the power that had become her only defense against a world that had already violated her once. Her story highlighted a cruel irony. The very abilities that could have made her a hero, perfect infiltration skills, near invulnerability, unlimited disguise options, were the same abilities that trapped her in villainy, because they came at the cost of her humanity. She couldn't be trusted by heroes when she could be literally anyone, and she couldn't return to normal life when her normal form no longer existed. Dr. Grace Balin's transformation followed a different but equally tragic path. She had been a marine biologist dedicated to ocean conservation, someone who genuinely loved the underwater world and devoted her career to protecting it. When a spinal injury left her partially paralyzed, Grace faced a future in a wheelchair, unable to do the diving and field work that had defined her life. She refused to accept that limitation. Grace developed an experimental treatment using orca whale DNA, believing she could regenerate her damaged spine by incorporating the healing properties found in marine mammals. She tested the treatment on herself because no ethics board would approve such radical experimentation, and initially, it seemed to work. She could walk again. She could move without pain. But the treatment didn't stop at healing, it continued transforming her. Over time, Grace's body changed into a human-orca hybrid. She grew to massive size, developed incredible strength, gained the ability to breathe underwater, and survive at crushing ocean depths. Her skin took on the distinctive black and white coloration of an orca. Most troubling, her mind began changing along with her body. She became more aggressive, more territorial, more predatory in her thinking patterns. The peaceful scientist who had loved all ocean life started viewing humans as the enemy, as the species destroying everything she cared about. As orca, Grace attacked ships that polluted Gotham's waterways, destroyed fishing operations she deemed harmful to marine ecosystems, and killed people she considered enemies of the ocean. Her methods were violent and her strength was terrifying. Batman faced her multiple times and always struggled with the moral complexity of her situation. Grace Balin had been trying to heal herself, and had become a monster through no deliberate fault of her own. She was both victim and perpetrator, both the woman who wanted to save the ocean and the creature who murdered people in its name. The tragedy deepened because somewhere inside the monster Dr. Balin still existed. She would have moments of clarity where she recognized what she had become and was horrified by it. She wanted to be human again, wanted to return to her research and her peaceful life. But she was also addicted to the power her transformation had given her, to the feeling of being strong and feared rather than weak and pitied. Her cure had become her prison, and she couldn't find the strength to escape it. Margaret Pye's story was different because her transformation was psychological rather than physical, but no less destructive to her sense of self. Margaret suffered from severe kleptomania and hoarding disorder, genuine mental illnesses that she tried desperately to control through therapy and medication. Nothing worked. The compulsion to steal was overwhelming, and more specifically, she felt an irresistible attraction to shiny, glittering objects. She became Magpie, adopting the persona of a bird known for collecting bright objects, and turned her compulsion into a criminal career. She specialized in jewelry heists, stealing diamonds and precious metals, not because she needed the money, but because she literally could not stop herself. The psychological drive was so intense that even when she knew she would be caught, even when she understood the consequences, she still had to take the shiny things she saw. What made Magpie's story particularly sad was that she left trinkets and small objects at her crime scenes compulsively, unable to just take without also giving something back. It was as if part of her brain recognized that stealing was wrong and tried to compensate, but the compensation was as compulsive as the theft itself. She was trapped in a cycle she couldn't break, a prisoner of her own neurology. Batman encountered Magpie repeatedly, and each time he saw someone who needed psychiatric help rather than imprisonment. She wasn't evil or malicious, she was sick with an illness that the criminal justice system had no ability to treat effectively. She would be arrested, sent to Arkham Asylum, treated, released, and within weeks or months, the compulsion would overwhelm her again and she would return to crime. The cycle was endless and exhausting for everyone involved, especially Margaret herself, who was fully aware of her problem but powerless to stop it. The female version of Copperhead brought yet another form of transformation to Gotham's underworld. She had been genetically modified by unknown parties, her body altered to possess serpentine flexibility and the ability to produce venom. She could contort herself into impossible positions, strike with a snake's speed, and kill with a bite that delivered toxins directly into her victim's bloodstream. Unlike the other transformed villains, Copperhead showed little interest in returning to a normal human existence. She embraced what she had become, working as a professional assassin who took pride in her abilities. Her story raised questions about whether transformation into something monstrous was inherently tragic, or whether it only became tragic when the transformed person rejected what they had become. Copperhead had made peace with her alterations, had found purpose and identity in being something other than human. Did that make her less of a victim than Grace Bowlin or Sondra Fuller, who mourned their lost humanity? Or did it simply mean she had found a different way of coping with violation and transformation? These women, whether changed by science, accident, or their own neurology, represented a particular kind of horror. They were trapped in forms or patterns they couldn't escape, and their villainy stemmed directly from those traps. Society had no framework for helping them, because they existed in the spaces between criminal and victim, between human and monster, between illness and evil. Batman fought them when they threatened innocent lives, but even he recognized that imprisonment wasn't a solution to their fundamental problems. They needed help that Gotham, perhaps that any city, simply didn't know how to provide. Not every female villain in Gotham operated through brute force or superhuman abilities. Some wielded their intellect as their primary weapon, orchestrating elaborate schemes that challenged Batman's detective skills as much as his fighting prowess. These women proved that the most dangerous adversary isn't always the strongest, but often the smartest. Peyton Riley's story began in the heart of Gotham's organized crime families. Born into one of the city's prominent mob dynasties, she grew up surrounded by violence and criminal enterprise, learning from childhood that power came from controlling others, and that weakness was punished swiftly. She understood the brutality of Gotham's underworld in ways that outsiders never could, because she had been raised within it, groomed to potentially lead when her time came. Everything changed when Peyton discovered the ventriloquist dummy known as Scarface. The original ventriloquist, Arnold Wesker, had used the dummy for years, claiming it was the puppet that controlled him, rather than the other way around. When Wesker was temporarily out of the picture, Peyton found Scarface and something inexplicable happened. The dummy, or perhaps the psychological framework it represented, latched onto her mind. What made Peyton's situation different from Wesker's was her awareness of what was happening. Unlike Wesker, who genuinely seemed to believe Scarface was a separate entity, Peyton understood on some level that she was doing this to herself. She could feel her personality fragmenting, could sense Scarface's influence growing stronger, but she couldn't stop it. The dummy became her voice for all the rage and ambition she had suppressed, while growing up in a world that expected women, even in crime families, to remain secondary to men. Through Scarface, Peyton became a major player in Gotham's underworld, The dummy's personality was vicious, crude, and absolutely ruthless in pursuing power. Peyton's own personality, softer and more uncertain, would emerge between episodes of Scarface's control, and during those moments, she would question what she had become. Was she using the dummy as a tool to express parts of herself she normally suppressed? Or was there something genuinely supernatural about Scarface that allowed it to possess those who wielded it? The psychological horror of her situation was profound. Peyton Riley had agency. She chose to keep using Scarface, but simultaneously she felt trapped by that choice. The dummy gave her power and respect in the criminal underworld that she had never achieved on her own. But it was also destroying her sense of self, piece by piece, until she could no longer remember where Peyton ended and Scarface began. She wanted freedom but was terrified of the powerlessness that freedom would bring. Batman's encounters with Peyton were complicated by this duality. He was fighting both a dangerous crime boss and a woman who was, in many ways, a prisoner of her own psychological fragmentation. Imprisoning her didn't solve the problem because, even in Arkham Asylum, separated from the dummy, Peyton couldn't escape the personality patterns Scarface had carved into her psyche. Jenna Duffy represented something unusual in Gotham's criminal ecosystem. Known as the Carpenter, she wasn't a villain in the traditional sense. She was a highly skilled builder and engineer who constructed hideouts, death traps, and elaborate mechanical devices for Gotham's criminal elite. Her work was professional grade, her prices were fair, and she approached crime with the attitude of a tradesperson rather than an ideologue. Jenna had no interest in violence personally. She didn't participate in the crimes her constructions facilitated, and she maintained strict neutrality in the ongoing war between heroes and villains. She would build a death trap for a supervillain one week and repair damage to a hero's hideout the next, treating both jobs with equal professionalism. To her, it was simply work. She had skills that were in demand, and she met that demand without moral judgment about how her creations would be used. This moral flexibility made her both useful and frustrating to everyone in Gotham's underground. Villains appreciated her discretion and quality craftsmanship, but couldn't completely trust someone who might be building escape routes for heroes on the side. Heroes understood she wasn't malicious, but struggled with the fact that her work directly enabled terrible crimes. Batman encountered her periodically and found himself in the unusual position of dealing with someone who wasn't truly an enemy but whose actions caused significant harm. The Carpenter represented Gotham's gray areas, the people who enabled evil without being evil themselves, who contributed to suffering without experiencing malice. She raised uncomfortable questions about complicity and responsibility. If you build the cage, are you guilty when someone is imprisoned in it? If you construct the weapon, do you bear responsibility for the deaths it causes? Jenna's answer seemed to be no, that she was simply a skilled laborer providing a service, but Batman and others found that moral position deeply troubling. The Court of Owls produced multiple female Talons throughout Gotham's history, and their stories were particularly tragic because they involved the complete destruction of individual identity. The Court, a secret society that had controlled Gotham from the shadows for centuries, created Talons by taking exceptional individuals, killing them, and resurrecting them using an alchemical compound similar to but distinct from Ra's al Ghul's Lazarus Pits. The resurrection process granted near immortality and enhanced physical abilities but also made the Talons controllable by the court. Various women throughout different eras had been chosen to become Talons, selected for their combat skills, intelligence, or simply because the court saw potential in them. Once transformed, they became living weapons with no will of their own. They retained their skills and some fragmented memories but lost their autonomy completely. They were assassins who could not refuse orders, soldiers who existed only to serve the court's mysterious agenda. Some Talons eventually broke free from the court's control, usually through Batman's intervention or through the degradation of the chemicals that bound them. These freed Talons faced an existence more cruel than death. They remembered fragments of who they had been before transformation, enough to mourn what they had lost, but not enough to fully reclaim their original identities. They were strangers to themselves, possessing skills and knowledge, but no context for where those abilities came from or who they had been before the court stole their lives. The female Talons who regained autonomy struggled with profound questions of identity and responsibility. Were they accountable for the murders they had committed while under the court's control? Could they build new lives when they barely remembered their old ones? Some sought redemption by fighting against the court that had enslaved them. Others simply tried to disappear, hoping to find some measure of peace in anonymity. A few descended into villainy, deciding that if they had already lost everything that made them human, they might as well embrace the monster the court had created. These women, the masterminds and the wildcards, the builders and the broken, showed yet another dimension of female villainy in Gotham. They weren't driven by the same forces that motivated Catwoman's survival instinct or Poison Ivy's environmental rage. They operated in stranger territory, places where morality became genuinely ambiguous, and where the line between victim and perpetrator blurred beyond recognition. They challenged Batman's worldview by existing in spaces his black and white sense of justice struggled to accommodate, forcing him to confront the reality that not every problem had a clear solution, and not every villain could be neatly categorized as evil or redeemable. We've journeyed through the complete histories of Gotham's most dangerous women, and patterns emerge from these stories that reveal uncomfortable truths about the city itself and the society that shapes it. Each woman started somewhere different, with different dreams and different wounds, but Gotham found ways to break them all. The common threads are impossible to ignore. Trauma appears in nearly every origin story, whether it's Selina Kyle watching her mother die and suffering her father's abuse, or Pamela Esley being betrayed by someone she trusted, or Harley Quinn falling victim to the master manipulator she thought she could heal. Gotham doesn't create villains from nothing. It takes women who have already been wounded and pushes them past the point where healing seems possible. Obsession defines many of these paths to villainy. Harley's obsession with the Joker destroyed the brilliant psychiatrist she had been. Talia's obsession with both her father's mission and her love for Bruce Wayne trapped her between two irreconcilable loyalties. Baby Doll's obsession with reclaiming her moment of acceptance drove her to kidnap and violence. Calendar Girl's obsession with youth and beauty made her unable to see the woman she actually was. These obsessions became prisons more secure than any cell in Arkham Asylum, because the bars were built inside their own minds. Transformation, both physical and psychological, marks nearly every story we've explored. Some transformations were literal, like Poison Ivy's plant hybrid physiology, or Orca's marine mammal alterations. Others were metaphorical but no less complete, like Harley Quinn's drowning in chemicals that mirrored her psychological drowning in toxic love, or Lady Shiva's transformation from grieving sister into the world's deadliest assassin. In each case, the woman who emerged from transformation could never fully return to who she had been before. What makes these stories particularly heartbreaking is how many of these women started with noble intentions. Pamela Isley wanted to use botany to help humanity and heal the planet. Grace Barlin wanted to cure her disability and continue her marine conservation work. Harley Quinn wanted to heal the damaged minds of Gotham's criminals. Andrea Barmon simply wanted justice for her murdered father. Their methods became monstrous, but their initial motivations often weren't. The cycle continues because Gotham itself never changes at its core. New female villains emerge regularly, each one reflecting the specific failures and anxieties of her era. Punchline represents modern celebrity worship culture and the way violence can be aestheticized and consumed as entertainment. Earlier villains like Catwoman represented the desperation of poverty and the survival instincts it creates. The city evolves, but its darkness remains constant, always finding new ways to corrupt and break those who live within its shadows. Some found redemption, or at least movement toward it. Harley Quinn's journey from the Joker's abuse victim to independent anti-hero and occasional hero showed that change was possible, even after years of conditioning and trauma. Catwoman evolved from self-interested thief to protector of Gotham's most vulnerable populations, using her skills to help rather than simply to survive. Even some iterations of Clayface sought to reclaim their humanity despite the literal loss of their human forms. These stories of potential redemption offered hope that the cycle could be broken, that villainy wasn't an irreversible condition. But redemption came at tremendous cost and required extraordinary strength. Harley had to break free from an abusive relationship that had rewired her psychology. Catwoman had to overcome years of conditioning that taught her trust was dangerous, and everyone would eventually betray her. The women who found paths back toward heroism, or at least away from villainy, had to fight not just external enemies, but their own damaged psyches and the comfortable patterns their trauma had created. Batman's response to these female villains revealed complexities in his own character. He treated them with the same professional respect he showed male criminals, never patronizing or underestimating them because of their gender. He recognized their trauma without using it as an excuse for their crimes. He offered rehabilitation and help when possible, but never hesitated to stop them when they threatened innocent lives. His relationships with women like Catwoman and Talia showed he could see the person beneath the villain, but he never let personal feelings completely override his mission. Yet Batman himself was trapped in a cycle. Arkham Asylum had a revolving door that returned the same villains to the streets repeatedly. The system was designed to punish rather than heal, to contain rather than cure. Batman spent decades fighting symptoms of Gotham's disease without ever finding a way to cure the disease itself. The city that created these villains remained fundamentally unchanged, which meant new generations would continue emerging to replace those who were captured, killed, or redeemed. The female villains of Gotham represented specific systemic failures that society preferred to ignore, beauty standards that discarded women the moment they aged. As Calendar Girl's story illustrated, scientific ethics violations and the exploitation of vulnerable researchers, as Poison Ivy's transformation demonstrated. The failure to properly treat mental illness, visible in characters like Magpie, who suffered from genuine disorders, the justice system had no ability to address. Domestic violence and psychological manipulation, embodied in Harley Quinn's years of abuse. Each villain was both an individual tragedy and a symbol of larger societal problems. Gotham created its villains through poverty, corruption, inadequate mental health care, corporate exploitation, and a justice system focused on punishment rather than rehabilitation. Batman fought individuals, but the forces that created those individuals remained largely untouched. It was an exhausting and ultimately futile battle, which perhaps explained why even Batman, with all his resources and determination, couldn't truly save Gotham. Understanding these women's stories doesn't excuse their crimes or erase the harm they caused. Murder remains murder regardless of the trauma that preceded it. Terrorism doesn't become acceptable because it targets polluters and corporate criminals. Violence against innocent people can't be justified by past suffering. But understanding context allows for something that pure punishment never provides: the possibility of genuine change and the recognition that creating fewer villains requires addressing the conditions that create them. As Gotham sleeps tonight, these women exist in various states. Some are imprisoned in Arkham, dreaming dreams we can only imagine. Some walk free, having earned redemption or simply evaded capture. Some are dead, though in Gotham death is often temporary, thanks to Lazarus Pits and other resurrections. Some straddle the line between hero and villain, protecting their territories while pursuing their own agendas. They are Gotham's daughters, shaped by its darkness, reflecting its failures, and occasionally transcending its limitations. Their stories remind us that villainy rarely emerges from nowhere. It's cultivated by neglect, abuse, betrayal, and systemic failure. Society creates its own monsters through the way it treats its most vulnerable members, through the services it fails to provide, through the violence it permits, and the injustice it perpetuates. Gotham is an extreme example, a city so corrupt and dark that it seems almost fantastical, but the forces that create its villains exist in the real world too. Rest now in the knowledge that these stories, while dark, are also stories of human resilience and complexity. These women survived terrible circumstances, Even if survival sometimes meant becoming something terrible themselves, they loved and lost, dreamed and failed, fought and fell. They were human before they were villains, and many retained some humanity even at their worst. Tomorrow brings new stories, new challenges, new darkness to explore. But for tonight, let these tales settle into memory as you drift towards sleep. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Gotham's shadows. If you enjoyed this exploration, please subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the worlds we love. Leave a comment about which villain's story affected you most, and sleep well, knowing that even in the darkest stories, there are lessons about compassion, understanding, and the complex nature of good and evil. Good night.